The sun spilled gold over the glass windows of the Miami resort, the kind of light that makes you believe a day will stay perfect forever. Guests laughed near the pool, champagne flutes sparkled, and music floated across the terrace. Weddings are supposed to be the purest symbol of love and family. But in my case, beneath the polished marble floors and fragrant roses, something darker waited, an unexpected truth that turned my son's happiest day into the most humiliating moment of my life. Before I go further, I want to ask you something. If you've ever witnessed a family moment that shocked you to your core, share it in the comments below. And please let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Your support means more than you know. My name is Marianne Carter. I am 68 years old, a retired high school teacher. For 35 years, I taught literature and history, stamping essays with red ink by day, and returning home to raise my only son, Ethan. I thought I had weathered life's cruelties, losing my husband when Ethan was barely 12, selling heirlooms to keep the lights on, sacrificing every comfort so he might have a chance at more. I believed all those struggles had finally led to this day, a wedding meant to seal happiness. I was wrong. The ceremony itself sparkled like a scene from a magazine. Sophia, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, floated down the aisle in lace and pearls. Ethan's eyes glistened with tears that reminded me of him as a boy when I read bedtime stories to ease his fears of thunder. I told myself maybe she truly does love him. Maybe I can learn to love her, too. I clapped. I smiled. I pretended nothing about her sharp tone or dismissive looks mattered. But once the applause faded and the vows were done, she pulled me aside. Her hand was cold when it gripped my wrist, guiding me toward a private lounge lit by a single chandelier. "Marianne," she said, voice coated with sugar but eyes sharp as glass. "We've talked about our future. Ethan and I found the perfect condo on the waterfront. We need a down payment. Your house is worth $600,000, isn't it? Why don't you sign it over as our wedding gift?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That house wasn't just wood and brick. It was where Ethan took his first steps, where his father's laugh still seemed to echo in the hallways, where I had patched leaky roofs with my own hands. It was the only thing left that truly belonged to me. I shook my head. "No, Sophia, that's my home." Her smile vanished. In an instant, her hand flew across my face. The slap cracked like a whip, loud enough to draw the attention of the groomsmen standing nearby. My cheek burned and the taste of iron filled my mouth. Behind her, Ethan appeared in the doorway. My son. My only son. He froze his eyes, darting between me and his new wife. But no words came. No defense, no outrage, just silence. And in that silence, something in me broke, and something else long buried began to rise. I drove home that night with my cheek still throbbing, the echo of Sophia's hand branded on my skin. Yet the deeper wound was not physical. It was the silence of my son, a silence that screamed louder than any insult. And as the city lights blurred through my windshield, my mind slipped backward, back to the years when silence was my companion, when sacrifice was the only language I knew. For 35 years, I stood in front of classrooms filled with restless teenagers, chalk dust clinging to my skirts, red ink staining my fingertips. I taught them Shakespeare and American history, believing that knowledge could steady their uncertain futures. Each paycheck, modest as it was, found its way into Ethan's needs, school books braces later, his college tuition. When my husband died suddenly, I sold my wedding jewelry just to keep our home from foreclosure. I told Ethan it was fine that gold and diamonds were nothing compared to seeing him smile. But I cried into my pillow that night, holding the empty velvet box that once symbolized promises of forever. There were dreams I never spoke aloud. I had longed to see Florence, to stand in front of Botticelli's Primavera, to taste real Italian espresso. But those plans folded into the same box where I kept unpaid bills and school notices. Every time Ethan needed something, I convinced myself that my time would come later. Later never came. Anna, my neighbor and dearest friend, used to warn me. She'd lean on my kitchen counter, sipping coffee from the mug she insisted on keeping at my house. "Marianne, you can't pour from an empty cup forever. Keep something for yourself. I'd laugh it off. He's my son, Anna. Isn't that what mothers are for? She would sigh, shake her head and say, one day he might forget how much you gave. I never believed her. Until now. Sitting in the quiet of my living room that night, the lamp casting long shadows across the photographs on the wall, I studied Ethan's face in every frame: his first day of school, his baseball games, his college graduation. Each picture was proof of what I had surrendered. I pressed my fingers to the glass as if I could touch the boy he once was. The boy who used to slip handmade cards under my door with words like, "Thanks for loving me, Mom." Somewhere between those drawings and this wedding, something had shifted. Or perhaps it was me who had refused to see it. The little boy I had protected had grown into a man who now allowed his wife to strike me without lifting a word in my defense. I thought of Anna's words, again heavy now with truth. Keep something for yourself. I had dismissed it then. But in that moment, staring at the life I had built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, I realized I had kept nothing, not even my dignity, and that I decided was about to change. Change rarely arrives like a thunderclap. It creeps in quietly until one day you realize the ground beneath you has already shifted. Long before the slap, the signs had been there, whispered warnings I chose to ignore. Sophia's distance had started subtly. When Ethan first introduced us, she was polite, even charming in the way young women can be when they want approval. But as their relationship deepened, her warmth toward me cooled. Phone calls that once ended with "say hi to Mom" became shorter, then stopped altogether. Ethan's Sunday visits grew infrequent, always with an excuse. Sophia's parents invited us, or "she's not feeling well." Each time I told myself it was natural, he was building a new life. Yet beneath the understanding, a small ache grew, like a draft slipping through a closed window. The rehearsal dinner confirmed what my heart already feared. The villa's banquet hall glowed with strings of lights draped across vaulted ceilings. Round tables dressed in linen gleamed with polished silverware. Guests laughed and clinked glasses, the air thick with the scent of roasted lamb and roses. When I searched for my seat, I discovered my name card tucked far in the back beside cousins I barely knew. From my corner, I could see the head table where Ethan and Sophia sat surrounded by her family, their laughter rising like a tide that washed me further out to sea. I sat quietly, folding my napkin into small nervous shapes, watching Sophia command the room as though it were a stage built solely for her. She leaned in close to Ethan, whispering in his ear, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. At one point, I caught her mother's gaze, sharp appraising, as if measuring me against some invisible standard. She leaned to her sister and muttered something that drew a smirk. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew I was the punchline. And yet, not every eye in that hall looked away. Across the room, Sophia's younger brother Lucas studied me with a furrowed brow. He was in his late 20s, tall and reserved nothing like his flamboyant sister. When our eyes met, he offered a faint nod, the kind you give someone you see being treated unfairly. Later, as guests drifted toward the terrace, he approached quietly. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice low so no one else could hear, "I'm sorry for the way my sister treats you. She doesn't know how to respect boundaries." I wanted to thank him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I placed a hand over his, briefly an acknowledgement that I heard him, that I wasn't entirely invisible. Still, the evening left me hollow. Driving home, I replayed every detail: the distant seat, the whispered gossip, the weight of being treated as an outsider in the very celebration I had paid for. The warning signs were no longer whispers. They were shouts I could no longer ignore. And though I didn't yet know it, that dinner was not just a rehearsal for the wedding, it was a rehearsal for betrayal. The rehearsal had been a warning, but the wedding day itself delivered the verdict. Everything about the Miami resort gleamed with perfection: the marble floors polished to a mirror shine, the sea breeze drifting through glass doors, the guests in their finest clothes. I had paid for it all, down to the lilies floating in crystal bowls. Yet in the midst of all that beauty, I felt like a guest in my own family. After the ceremony, when the applause faded and the guests scattered for cocktails, Sophia touched my arm. Her fingers were cold, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Just a moment, Marianne," she whispered, guiding me through a side corridor. I followed unwillingly until we reached a lounge tucked away from the noise, a chandelier casting fractured light across the walls. She didn't waste time. "You're living alone in a house that's too big," she said, her tone sweet on the surface but edged with impatience. "Ethan and I are starting our life together. We've found the perfect condo by the marina. It's time to pass things on. That house of yours, $600,000, isn't it? Sign it over. Consider it our wedding gift." Her words struck like ice water. For a moment, I just stared at her, trying to understand if I had heard correctly. "My home?" I asked quietly. "Yes, your home," she repeated with a laugh that carried no joy. "You don't need it. Memories are just walls and furniture. We need a future." I felt the blood drain from my face. "No, Sophia. That house is mine. It holds my life, my husband's memory, and Ethan's childhood. It isn't yours to take." The air thickened with her fury. Her smile collapsed, and in its place a storm gathered. "You selfish old woman," she hissed. Then before I could move her hand, rose and came down with brutal force. The sound cracked through the room. My head snapped sideways, my cheek blazing with pain as I staggered back against the wall. The chandelier's light blurred. Gasps filled the doorway, 2 bridesmaids, the groomsmen, even little Lucas. And then Ethan appeared. My son, my only son. His eyes widened at the sight of me pressed against the wall, Sophia's hand still raised in the air. For one suspended moment, I believed he would defend me. I waited for the words, for his arms, for something, but he said nothing. Nothing at all. His silence was heavier than the slap, heavier than the wall against my back. I steadied myself, pulled my shoulders upright, and met Sophia's gaze. My voice, when it came, was steady, stripped of tears. "I wish you both happiness," I said. Just that, no more. And then I turned my skirt, brushing the marble floor as I walked past them, past the stunned bridesmaids, past Ethan's vacant stare, past the man he had become and the boy I had lost. The party roared on in the distance, laughter spilling like champagne. But for me, the wedding was already over. When I stepped out of that lounge, past the chandeliers and hollow laughter, I knew something inside me had shifted forever. I had spent a lifetime absorbing blows in silence, telling myself it was my duty to endure. But as the night air hit my face and the salt of the ocean clung to my skin, a thought as sharp as glass cut through the fog. I would no longer pay for my own humiliation. At home, the house greeted me with its familiar quiet. The basil on the windowsill carried the same fragrance I'd tended since Ethan was a boy, but it no longer comforted me. It accused me. How much of myself had I given away until even respect could be stolen in public without consequence? I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the small leather notebook I'd kept for months. In it were names, contracts, numbers, the invisible architecture of the wedding that everyone admired. The villa, the caterers, the florist, the photographer, the band. Every signature in that book was mine. I lifted the phone and dialed the first number. My voice was steady, almost clinical. "This is Mrs. Carter. I'm canceling the event tomorrow, effective immediately." There was shock on the other end. Pleas, even threats. But each time I repeated the same words, "Read the contract. The clause allows cancellation 12 hours before. I'm within my rights. Cancel everything." When I reached the resort, the call was answered by David, the event manager. I remembered his face from earlier that evening. He had been standing in the corridor when Sophia's hand struck me. His hesitation over the phone was thick. "Mrs. Carter, this is highly irregular. The wedding is scheduled for tomorrow. The guests, I know what I'm asking." I cut in, my voice low but unwavering. "I saw you in the hallway tonight, David. You know what happened. I won't fund a celebration built on that kind of violence. Cancel it, all of it." Silence. Then a long sigh. "You're right, I did see. I'll honor the clause. Consider it done." When I hung up, I felt my hands tremble, not with fear, but with release. One by one, I crossed out the numbers in my notebook, the ink bleeding like small funerals for promises I had once made. By 2 a.m, the book was nearly empty, my obligations severed with each call. The The next day, the sun rose over Miami as if nothing had changed, but at the resort, confusion spread like wildfire. Guests arrived dressed in silk and suits, only to find locked doors, no flowers, no music, no feast. The champagne never poured the band, never played the fireworks, never touched the sky. Whispers rippled through the halls, first in disbelief, then in outrage. By noon, the news had reached every corner of the resort. The wedding was off, dismantled by the very woman who had built it. For the first time in years, I felt something close to power. Not loud, not vengeful, but quiet and absolute. By morning, word of the collapsed wedding had spread like wildfire. Guests who had flown in from New York and Chicago paced the resort lobby in disbelief, luggage still in hand, whispering about the mother of the groom who had pulled the plug. I stayed at home, curtains drawn, the silence of my living room, a refuge against the chaos I knew was unraveling elsewhere. But silence never lasts. It was late afternoon when the knock came, firm, insistent. When I opened the door, I found Clara Sophia's mother, flanked by two aunts, their faces tight with disapproval. Behind them, almost like an afterthought, stood Lucas, hands in his pockets, his eyes downcast, Marianne. Clara began, her voice carefully measured. "We need to talk." They didn't wait for an invitation. They swept into my living room, the scent of their perfume overwhelming the familiar comfort of my basil plants. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Clara perched on the edge of my sofa, her pearls catching the light. "You've made a terrible mistake," she said. "The children are devastated. The guests humiliated. Sophia has been crying all night. You can't ruin their lives over one impulsive moment." The word lodged in my chest like a thorn. Impulsive. I remembered the sting of Sophia's hand, the stunned silence of my son. I steadied my voice. "Your daughter is 32 years old, Clara. Old enough to know better. Old enough to be accountable." One of the aunts leaned forward, her bracelets clinking. "But you're older, wiser. Shouldn't you be the one to show restraint, to forgive?" Forgive. Such a simple word tossed into the air as if it cost nothing. I looked at the three women, their expectant faces. They didn't see me as a person, only as a barrier to be moved, a wall, standing between their daughter and what she wanted. From the corner, Lucas shifted. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant at first. "Mom," he said, glancing at Clara, "I don't agree. Sophia went too far." The room froze. Clara turned sharply. "Lucas, not now." But he pressed on his tone firmer. "I saw it. I saw her slap Mrs. Carter. That wasn't impulsive. That was cruel. And Ethan just stood there." The aunts gasped, one muttering, "Don't betray your own family." Lucas looked directly at me, then his eyes steady. "I'm sorry for what my sister did. She doesn't speak for all of us." For the first time that day, something in my chest loosened. Not relief exactly, but recognition that truth still had a voice, even if it came from the unlikeliest source. Clara rose, her composure cracking. "We came here for reconciliation, not division." "Marianne, please reconsider. Think of Ethan. Think of the future." I stood too, my voice quiet but resolute. "I am thinking of the future. Mine." The words hung in the air, final and immovable. The women left in a flurry of indignation, their perfume trailing behind like smoke. Only Lucas lingered, pausing at the doorway to nod once more. In that nod, I saw the faintest flicker of something I had thought lost forever: respect. After Clara and her sisters left, the house felt strangely still, the air heavy with the echo of words I refused to swallow back. I thought perhaps the storm had passed, but storms always return in new forms. By evening, another knock came softer, this time almost hesitant. When I opened the door, there stood Ethan, his suit wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes red-rimmed from sleepless hours. "Mom," he said, voice frayed, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, motioning him in. He sat on the edge of the sofa where Clara had perched hours before, had bowed like a boy caught in mischief. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. "Sophia knows she was wrong. She wants to apologize. Please don't throw everything away over one mistake." I studied him, the man my little boy had become, and felt a familiar ache press into my chest. "Ethan," I said, keeping my voice steady when your wife raised her hand against me, "why did you choose silence?" He flinched, eyes darting away. It happened so fast. I didn't know what to do. No, I said sharper now. You knew. You just chose not to do it. Not to defend me. He pressed his palms together as though in prayer. Mom, can't we move past this? Change your will back. Don't punish me for her actions. The words cut deeper than the slap. Punish you, I whispered. You stood by while I was humiliated. You asked for nothing less than my house. And now you dare to ask for my legacy. He stood abruptly pacing the room, desperation spilling from his gestures. I'm your son. Everything you own is mine eventually. Why drag lawyers into this? Because I said, rising to my feet, I have finally learned that silence is its own betrayal, and I will not leave this world with mine unanswered. The next morning, I met with Mr. Robinson, an old friend who had guided me through my husband's estate years ago. His office smelled of oak and leather, his spectacles perched low on his nose. You're certain, Marianne? He asked gently. Completely, I replied. We spent hours drafting the new documents. Ethan would not inherit freely. He would only receive anything if both he and Sophia issued a public apology and committed to counseling sessions together for at least a year. If they refused, my estate house savings investments would go to the Phoenix Foundation, the organization I intended to establish for women like me, women discarded, silenced, or struck down in their later years. As I signed my name to the final page, the pen felt heavier than any chalk I'd ever held in my teaching days. Yet when I placed it down, my hand was steady. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just a mother sacrificing. I was a woman drawing her own lines. The ink on Mr. Robinson's papers was barely dry when I realized my life was no longer chained to the past. The house, once a shrine to sacrifices and memories, suddenly felt like a museum I no longer wished to curate. Within months, I sold it, its walls echoing with laughter and tears that were no longer mine to keep. I moved into a modest condo by the shore, a place with sunlight spilling through wide windows and the ocean's hum constant in the background. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I arranged furniture for comfort rather than tradition filled the kitchen with colors I loved instead of Ethan's favorites and placed an easel by the balcony door. Anna convinced me to join her painting class, where my hands, once accustomed to chalk and lesson plans, found new freedom in strokes of blue and gold. And then came the letters. At first, only a trickle women who had read whispers of my story in the local paper. Widows, grandmothers, retired nurses and teachers. Women who had been dismissed, silenced, or pressured to surrender their dignity in the name of family. They thanked me for creating the Phoenix Foundation, a name I chose because it felt like rising from ashes. Soon the trickle became a steady stream. Each envelope carried a story of quiet endurance, each signature a reminder that I was no longer alone. One morning, among the usual stack of bills and notes, I found a letter in handwriting I knew as well as my own. Ethan. His words trembled across the page. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have spoken that night. Sophia and I are in counseling. She's working on her anger, and I am working on my silence. We hope one day to earn back your trust. Weeks later, another envelope arrived, this one in Sophia's handwriting. I braced myself for excuses, but instead I read, Humility, Mrs. Carter. I was wrong. I hurt you, and I hurt Ethan by asking him to stand in silence. I can't undo what I did, but I can learn from it. Please allow me the chance. I didn't reply immediately. Forgiveness is not a switch to be flipped. It is a garden to be tended. Still, I folded their letters carefully and placed them beside the growing pile of women's testimonies, letting them wait their turn. Through it all, Lucas kept in touch. He called to check on me, sometimes stopped by with groceries, once even joined Anna and me at a community art show. He said quietly, You've become more family to me than my own sister has been in years. In his steady presence, I found an unexpected ally, a thread of kinship sewn not by blood, but by respect. Now each evening, I sit on my balcony with a glass of wine and the sea breeze in my hair. The horizon glows with the same light it always has, yet it feels new as if it rises for me alone. For the first time in my life, I am not living for sacrifice or silence. I am living for myself. And in that quiet, I smile not out of duty, but out of freedom.